Hi, it's Len Testa from the Disney Dish podcast. This is our second February show, and the second on the history of Disneyland. This one covers the time between early 1955, just before Disneyland opens, until 1959, when the park's already a hit and starts to see its first growing pains. It's really good. We've also got a special February bonus show for you over on disneydish.bandcamp.com. Because we're releasing this show on President's Day weekend, the bonus show has a distinctly patriotic theme. We're talking about the history of Liberty Street in Disneyland, Liberty Square in Walt Disney World, and the never-built concepts for Disney's America in Virginia. Some really interesting things there about how Disney's California Adventure almost used some of those ideas. Definitely check it out at disneydish.bandcamp.com. Thanks for listening.
Welcome back to another edition of the Unofficial Guide Disney Dish podcast with Jim Hill. It's I, Len Testa, and this is our second February episode. Just like January, we're going to continue our story of the history of Disneyland. As if you recall, listening to the first episode, we did the history of Disneyland from the beginning of time, which started around 1901, until 1954, late 1954, when Walt is getting ready to open the park, which obviously happened in July of 55. To tell us that story, to continue on from 1955 to 1959, is our own historian, Mr. Jim Hill. Jim, how's it going?
Doing well, Len. Yourself?
I am doing exceptionally well. So, Disneyland's 60th anniversary, its birthday party is this year. Last time we talked about what happened up until the end of 1954. When Walt got the idea. And so now we're starting with 1955, right?
Well, we have to take, in order to go forward, we got to take one quick step back because it's important to understand Disneyland's financials because this is a big part of why things happened the way they happened.
Okay, so let me do the previously on the Unofficial Guide Disney Dish.
There we go. That's right.
I've been watching a lot of Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. in there. Sort of towards the. Do you ever notice towards the middle of that series they started doing a lot of cliffhanger episodes?
Yeah.
It was. All right, so here we go. Previously on the Unofficial Guide Disney Dish podcast with Jim Hill.
Okay, and as you recall, Roy Disney had met with CBS and NBC, and they'd both passed on the project, but they were able to cut a deal with Leonard Goldenson, who's the head of ABC.
And ABC at the time was like this loosely affiliated chain of regional television broadcast stations, right?
Oh, yeah. Again, the joke I think we made at the last show is that at that time this was a spin-off of the Dumont Network, and ABC, at least in the industry, was referred to as the Almost Broadcasting Company.
Right.
All right, but ABC knew that Disney could be the solution to a lot of its problems. So, in return for a $500,000 cash investment, more importantly, a $4.5 million line of credit, ABC wound up with 35% of Disneyland. Okay.
Wow.
Okay, but it gets better, Len. One of the terms of this deal is that ABC would receive all profits from the theme park's food concessions for 10 years.
That's a lot of churros.
That's a lot of churros. Okay, but Walt, and now in return for getting this money, Walt had to agree to deliver a weekly 1-hour television series for ABC. This is 21 hours of television for at least 3 years. So, 63 episodes, but ABC's lawyers had put language in the deal so that it allowed them to renew it for an additional 4 years. So basically they're locking Walt in for a 7-year contract. Plus there were options for 2 other shows, which turned out to be the Mickey Mouse Club and Zorro.
Who was the guy from ABC that negotiated that deal?
Supposedly it was Leonard himself, because again, he had to turn around and go to all the affiliates and line up the banking. I mean, he was the one who really believed that Walt was going to be the guy that was going to turn things around for them, to get people to pay attention.
So he gets a third of the profits.
Yeah.
Wait. No, sorry. What was he got? He got the profits, the concessions.
Well, they got all of the profits from the food concessions for 10 years. That was the language of the deal.
So it's a third of the gate profits.
Yep. Now, the interesting thing is Roy at least built language into the deal. He pushed back, and Roy built in language that would allow them to eventually buy out ABC, which when we get to the early 60s we'll discuss. But, because that Roy had been turned down by CBS and NBC. ABC was really in a primo position to get huge demands out of the concessions out of Disney, and
there
they did.
There were no more networks, right? There wasn't a Fox, there wasn't a CW,
No,
right? There's
no. I mean,
networks. There were 2.5 anyway.
Beyond that, it was Walt going door to door with puppets. So, all right. So now, just again, circle back to the finances. So when you factor in the $500,000 that Walt Disney Productions itself put up to help fund Disneyland, and again, the way Roy wrote the deal, that then gave the company 34.48% of Disneyland. The $250,000 that Walt himself put up by selling his life insurance and taking in lots of loans out in his house, that gave him 16.55%. And then $200,000 that Western Publishing, they're the folks who handle Disney's comic books and that sort of thing.
Yep.
They put up. That gave them 13.8% of Disneyland. So at this point, Walt has just shy of $6 million to build Disneyland.
Wait, $200,000 got them 13% of Disneyland?
Yep. Well, just you have to understand, it was, again, Walt needed money, and this
was fire sale prices. Okay.
Yeah, and so Walt now has just shy of $6 million. He needs $7 million. So this is where C.V. Wood comes in, and it's C.V. Wood Jr. or Cornelius Vanderbilt Wood Jr.
It sounds like he should be on a riverboat.
He should be. He was, that he was the necessary element here. He was, Walt was the creative, and C.V. was an unvarnished salesman, very much in the style of Harold Hill. I mean, he went out. He went out and found money and sold Disneyland in as many different directions as he could. And, for example, he got an agreement out of the Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe Railroad. He signed up.
How could you say that without singing it, Jim?
But he got $50,000 a year out of that train company in exchange for them having the rights to put the name Santa Fe and the company logo on all of Disneyland's trains, the stations, any literature, that sort of thing. At the same time, Walt wanted to build this recreation of, a main street, and you had to fill those shops. So, CV was the one who went out and convinced, Eastman that they wanted to come to fund the camera center and
went to film and stuff like that.
Yeah, you convinced the Wurlitzer organ people that, people will come to this park and they'll come into your shop and hear the organ play, and they really will then buy an organ, which you'll then have to figure out how to bring home from Anaheim.
That's what package pickup is for.
There you go. And, Bank of America, Gibson greeting card. In fact, I've got, I'm actually holding in my hands now. These are, the old fashioned heavy fiber paper. These are typewritten things from April 25th, 1957. This is the list of every Disneyland sponsor, what is it? If you want to know the capacity of the hourly capacity of the Jungle Cruise back then, they could
really
2,112 people per hour.
That's a lot of people back then.
It was 67% of the gate did the Jungle Cruise back in the day. But
where did this come from? This is from CV?
This is actually from CV's company that he formed after he left Disney, a company called Marco Engineering. I was lucky enough to work with some folks who, sort of got in. Marco shut down in the early 90s, and it was one of these things where the people, in the offices were like, you need to clear all this stuff out by the weekend because we have new clients coming in. And just some amazing theme park history, was being tossed into the dumpster, and I was able to filter some of this stuff out as I was helping clear out the offices. But
okay, so CV's going at this time it's 1954, early 1955. CV's going door to door to get money from Wurlitzer organs. Did you give a list of like the people that he hit up? I mean, The Oregon thing is a little unusual, but I totally get the.
Well, for example, Seavey was the one who went to the American Dairy Association and convinced him to open the dairy bar in Tomorrowland. He went everywhere. He talked to Maxwell House to sponsor the coffee shop, and again to pay fee to do that. He went after Coca-Cola to run the refreshment corner. On Main Street. But what's interesting is he was able to also cut a deal with Pepsi-Cola to sponsor the Golden Horseshoe, which, again, gives you some idea of...
this guy's good.
Yeah, did I not mention that Pepsi's also in the park? Oh, I feel so...
Bring your kids.
There you go.
So, all right, so he's going to these places, and we've all been in the theme parks, hundreds of times. So the idea that you're selling film... seems natural. The idea that you're selling Coke seems natural. But did he at the time he didn't have any statistics to back this up? The idea of Disneyland is entirely different. No. What does he go? And he goes into these companies and what does he say? I mean, trust me, or trust Walt and give me $50,000. How does he do this?
It's just, it was kind of selling the sizzle before there was a steak. I mean, for example,
we haven't even brought Mommy and Daddy Cow together to make the steak yet.
There you go. Right. But it's just, some of the people, are just fascinating. For example, the Bluebird Shoe Company. They're little on Main Street. Mm-hmm. There was a store that sold children's shoes, and the way CV did it, it's like, well, look, that's families will come to Disneyland, and they'll come, and the kids, the kids' feet will hurt, and you can, that they'll cramp their feet. You can sell shoes. The one that fascinates me is Hollywood Maxwell. He actually convinced a corset, and the term they use is torsolet.
Torsolet.
There you go. So in other words,
small corset. Okay.
Bras, panties, the works. He convinced them to come into Main Street USA. And actually not only that, they paid for a Disney-produced show that you'd walk to the back of the store and the Wizard of Bras would tell you the histories of women's lingerie.
It's sort of like a predecessor of the Victoria's Secret lingerie show that's every Super Bowl, right? I'm sure it's all like that.
Yeah, in kind of a Jane Russell sort of way.
So he goes to this corset maker. They do the Wizard of Bras, which, by the way, I think is a great name. Mm-hmm. And then they have to go put it in. So how does he goes back to Walt and said, Walt, I've got some good news, and I've got some bad news. Good news is I got you a sponsorship. Bad news is we're doing a bra show, a lingerie show on Main Street. What's Walt's take on this, or what's Roy's take on this?
They can't say no at this point because what's happening is that in the process,
it's like I don't want to know.
It's just because the thing is, Disneyland's price, to get a construction price, jumped from $7 million to $11 million to $15 million, eventually topping out at 17. And in fact, I've had veteran Imagineers tell me that the real construction price of Disneyland was actually $18 million because a week after the park opened, somebody found a roll-top desk that, just the thing had been pulled down. They opened up, and here are all of these bills that have never been paid, that have just sort of stuff it in there, we'll deal with it after it's open. And it's just one of these things where it's like, honestly, any other company would have been killed. That given the way this project was bleeding money, and you also have to understand that Walt is busy at the same time trying to figure out how to do these 21 hours of television per season. He's also at the very same time doing their most expensive live action film ever, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Wow, yeah.
This is a bad time for the company, and honestly, Disney probably would have been taken down by all of these things if it hadn't been for Davy Crockett. Okay. Davy Crockett. Okay.
So you're talking about the. All right. So and we all know how it ended up with coonskin caps, but this is early '55, and we haven't.
Yeah. Well, actually, the first episode, there were a total of 3 that were produced in 54, or excuse me, 54, 55. There was the first aired in December 15th, 1954.
Late 1950, and this was on ABC?
Yeah. Now, again, to give you some idea of the size of the audience that was watching Disneyland at this time, and again, this is one of the things on Disneyland, on ABC side of the fence, this gamble paid off huge. The first episode, when it aired in October 27th, 1954, 30 million people, to be exact, 30.8 million people tuned in to that episode. All right. No, there's no show on today. Not even the Super Bowl does that sort of numbers. So, that many people tuned in for this show.
Wow. And this is when, I mean, this is the mid 50s. Not that many families have televisions.
No. In fact, they had the phenomena of friends actually going over to friends' house to watch the Disney show, and Crockett just took off. In fact, depending on who you talk to in the company, it was definitely a cash cow. All right, but by the end of 55, over $300 million worth of Davy Crockett merchandise had been sold. That's $1 billion in 2015 money, Len.
Wow. Yeah. So just some quick statistics here. 30 million viewers for Davy Crockett would put it in the top 15 TV episode finales of all time.
Mm-hmm.
So the finale of Everybody Loves Raymond is the number 15 title according to Wikipedia of all time, which hit just under 33 million people.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking about now MASH hit 125 million people, but the population of people who had televisions was much larger. Yeah, so 30 million people. You're probably talking about like half the number of people that had televisions in the United States.
No, absolutely.
A 50 audience share.
Yeah, and every little kid in North America wanted a coonskin cap. Now, to be clear here, because Davy Crockett was a historic figure and really couldn't be copywritten by Disney, there was a lot of unauthorized stuff out there. But of the $300 million worth of merch that was sold, depending on who you talk to, it's $20 or $30 million that poured into the company's coffers just when they really needed this dough. When they were scrambling, to fund the construction of Disneyland, the fact that they suddenly had this other cash revenue was killer for them. And meanwhile, ABC is just, loving, just the numbers that are producing. In fact, they turned around and they started hyping the opening of Disneyland because they were going to be airing the 90-minute special on July 17th. And there was such interest in that broadcast that by March 13th of 1955, ABC had sold all of the advertising time.
Wow, so March, April, May, June, July. So 4 months in advance.
Yep.
But for a completely different thing. But for a Disneyland thing. So it was just the power of the Disney brand.
Yeah. And now, mind you, that it did look pretty dicey there for a while. I mean, ABC would bring its crews in every Sunday, the 6 weeks prior to the opening, and stage rehearsals. But toward the end, Disney was running crews 7 days a week, virtually 24 hours. And meanwhile, you've got your plumbing strike, you've got your asphalt workers strike, but again, Davy comes through, that they take the 3 episodes that had previously run on television, put them in theaters on May 25th, and bang, there's another cash cow. And then just less than 4 weeks later, Lady and the Tramp is released to theaters, and that's a big hit. And so Walt is just, any money that's coming in at this point is going straight into Disneyland.
So I hear there's a story about, speaking of Davy Crockett, that there was the contract that Fess Parker had was supposed to cut him in on a percentage of the merch sales.
Yeah. And that, the toughest part of that thing is it turns out Fess's contract wasn't with Disney Productions, it was with Walt himself. And evidently that's what led to, Fess being basically cut out of things that in fact, it was really a bone of contention. In fact, Fess took him a long time to start coming out for Disney events, mostly because he felt he should have gotten a bigger share, or at least, I mean, he was paid to do the things, and he had a pretty decent film career at that point. But again, he was under contract to work for Disney, so he was doing Old Yeller, he was doing Westward Ho the Wagons. He couldn't really go anywhere else, and it honestly wasn't till the mid 1960s when, he after seeing Walt cash in forever, or Disney cash in forever on Davy Crockett, that he started the Daniel Boone television series, and that's how Fess eventually got his Davy Crockett money. He just basically put on another coonskin cap and played the exact same character, but this time for NBC.
Okay.
And what was kind of interesting is at that point, both Fess and Walt were working for NBC because Walt had moved the Disneyland television show over to NBC and turned it into The Wonderful World of Color.
All right, we'll have to do a different show on that. Okay, so it's it's spring of '55.
Mm-hmm.
Davy Crockett's hit. Lady and the Tramp is hit. They're flush with money. We're 6 or so weeks out from opening Disneyland.
But at the same time, they're coming up against things that for example, they do the first test run of Casey Jr. and
the little train, the model train.
The little train, and they have a 25% grade on the thing, and they're taking it up the first hill, and the engine almost tips over backwards onto the train.
A 25% grade on a train track?
On a train track. Because again, this is the little train that I think I can.
Well, yeah, I know, but it's not going to break. So Jimmy, generally a 3 or 4% grade on a train,
mm-hmm.
An uphill pitch of 3 or 4% is a lot for a train. So 25% is like not even. There's no train track in the world that's 25%.
Well, they cheat it. They actually put lead weights. They add them to the front to give it an additional, the reason to hold down. And that allows it to work long enough for the television special. In fact, that's where it gets kind of interesting. The July 17th broadcast, there is so much stuff on that show that, for example, Danny Thomas's family are shown coming out of the rocket to the moon ride, and oh man, we had a great time on that attraction, and they show you a clip of what the ride is like. What they don't then mention is that it didn't open that day. It didn't open till July 22nd.
It worked one time.
Likewise,
worked once.
Casey Jr. runs once for the TV channel. In fact, Jerry Colonna, the voice of the Mad Hatter, is from Alice in Wonderland, is driving the train. It runs as long as the television cameras are on, and then it gets shut down. And it takes them till July 31st to have regraded, the Casey Jr. and get it the way it's going to open.
Wow.
The pirate ship that eventually became the Chicken of the Sea restaurant looks wonderful on camera. But they'd only painted the half that faced the camera. I mean, just over and over and over again, that there were all these cheats just to show that Disneyland was this wonderful place and you had to come. And
yeah.
But again, they get it open, and the very next day it opens to the public. And just to put these things in perspective, folks, admission at that point was $1 for adults, 50 cents for kids. And there were only a total of 20 attractions, but every attraction you had to dig out between 10 cents and 35 cents to board these things, and that really did become a bone of contention. In fact, that was one of the things that people, the first summer, that was the complaint. It just felt like at Disneyland, no matter where you were opening your wallet.
Yeah.
And so what they decided to do. Starting in September, they began the ticket books. We're all familiar with these. The notion, the ABCD tickets.
E-tickets,
yeah. Yeah. And that did, in fact, they officially came out online in October 11th, 1955 was the first day they were sold.
Okay.
And this was just a week after the Disneyland Hotel had opened. And again, hotel was being kind. It was a motel. It was 100 rooms, and guess how much to stay a night, Len?
Disneyland Hotel, 1955.
Right.
So it's $1 to get in.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say I could be wrong here. 25 a night.
Actually, 15. You're very close. But it's now Walt is trying to learn how to run a Disneyland, and so they've now got a place for people to stay. At the same time, the one thing they keep coming up against is, how do you work crowds? I mean, for example, as hard as this is to believe, when the Jungle Cruise opened, it didn't have a queue.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, the
I've
queues,
never heard this.
Yeah, the queues actually had to be invented on the fly, because the whole notion of, well, people are going to line up, and it's, well, where the hell is that line going to go? Oh, it's going out to the hub. It's like, we can't have that. Well, it's like, and this whole notion of, well, how do we actually operate this thing? They everything had to be learned.
Really? So it's a Jungle Cruise, which 2,000 people an hour,
right?
2,100 people an hour. We figured out. It didn't have a queue.
Mm-hmm.
So there wasn't. So what? Now when we go through it, we go onto a Disney ride. There's this transition experience, which is the queue itself, right? Which sort of, now we know a queue tells you a story. It gets you in the mood. It provides you sort of the visual language that you'll see on a ride. But you're saying there was none of that when the Disneyland first opened?
No, not at all. In fact, they just and to be fair, some of this was finished so late. And, they just basically threw open the doors, and, people came in, and then it's like, oh, crap, go get some chains, go get some poles, and let's figure out how, to get people to line up.
So when did the, so they get the ropes and chains, and they make an orderly line, but when did was it in 55 that they said, you know what, we're going to need a formal line here, and while we're at it, we should use this time that they're going to wait to introduce them to the concept of the ride?
Actually, they were more concerned at that point about making sure that the guests had the right ticket. That God help you that if you were getting on a C ticket and you made your way all the way through the line and only had an A ticket. So, they started the first spiels were, were more about not so much the ride as be sure that you have your B ticket for the, the omnibus or, that sort of thing.
And so how did they deliver these? Was it a recorded loop?
Well, that was the thing, that initially it was some poor teenager who kept saying this over and over again. And eventually Walt, who'd come to the park every weekend and walk it and realize, ooh, we need to do better show here, and would then hire somebody to write the script and then record the loop, and then, there it was. But at the same time, this is a guy who's trying desperately to come up with new rides for his park to handle the additional capacity. I mean, for example, based on how well the first 3 Davy Crockett movies did, or the television shows that were then turned into the King of the Wild Frontier movie, Walt actually put 2 additional Davy Crockett films into production, or TV episodes, excuse me. The Davy Crockett Keelboat Race, which aired on ABC television November 16th of 55, and then the follow-up episode, the Davy Crockett and the River Pirates, which aired December 14th, 1955. Now, and again, here's what's cool, okay? That episode, the second episode, and these 2 episodes are basically Davy Crockett paired with Mike Fink. All right. Second episode airs December 14th. If you went to Disneyland on December 25th and walked down to the Rivers of America, what do you see? The 2 actual keel boats that were used in the making of this TV series that are now a ride. All right.
Wow, and I've been on them. You've been on them too, no doubt.
Well, actually, the interesting thing is that they actually were eventually replaced by larger boats because they were so popular.
Oh, really? But you've been on the ride.
Yeah, but again, it's this whole notion of you needed. We need capacity. Get me the boats. Bring them back to Anaheim. We're throwing them in the water.
I didn't. In the last 5 minutes, we've gone over the fact that there weren't queues at the rides.
Yep.
The origin story of Spiels, and then the Mike Fink keelboats, which I didn't. I mean, I knew they were there, but I never knew what the story was that how they came about. That is super interesting.
Well, and where this gets particularly interesting is starting in January of 56, Walt suddenly finds himself having competition. I mean, it wouldn't loom over the horizon immediately, but it was coming.
56.
Walt, 56, depending on who you talk to. uh, again, CV was the guy who found the money that made Disneyland possible in those last scary months. But the park's up and running. It's clear it's going to be a financial success at this point. It's now money isn't a problem, capacity is a problem.
Okay.
And Walt and CV start to get on each other's nerves, and Walt eventually decides, look, it's built. It was nice to have a project manager. It's built. I'm now going to finesse it. I'm going to let CV go. Now,
He's not going to find another role for him inside the company.
No, and in fact, supposedly that depending on who you talk to, CV evidently Walt showed up at Disneyland one day, and again, this is the general manager and vice president of Disneyland, and shows up at CV's office, and CV's on the phone talking about how he built the park, how he found the money, and this just rubbed Walt the wrong way, so he just said, look. Thank you for your help, and let's just part friends. And CV goes, this is a Friday, and CV, again, in today's corporate world, you'd get walked out to the parking lot, and you'd have your bag of personal belongings and sent on your way. Where CV cleaned out his entire office, as in his Rolodex with the contacts of everybody he'd ever worked with to do the parks, all of the letterhead, that every letter from every vendor. And, this is a Friday. By Monday morning, he set up Marco Engineering. And as the master builder of Disneyland, he now announces that he and his expertise are available to build, Disneyland-like attractions around the country.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I mean, Walt has this history with his employees of keeping them around forever and then finding new things for them to do. But apparently, it must have been something. There must have been a really big personality clash between him and CV for him not to keep CV around.
Well, again, to face it, there is, there's kind of a famous story about the animator and artist Ken Anderson, the gentleman who worked on a lot of Disney films, and Walt loved what Ken did, just loved it. But he said, look, you're a great artist, you're a great talent, but you have to understand that everything you do is going to have my name on it.
Right.
And as long as you're comfortable with that, you can have a great career here. But you were not in the Ken Anderson business; you were in the Walt Disney business.
Yeah, okay. All right.
All right. And now, speaking of which, it just kind of an insight into, this has just gone on. But on January 25th, 1956, Walt sits down with the Disneyland Merchants Association, all these people who are running the various shops and restaurants in the park, and then proceeds to spin out his vision for what he wants to do with the park going forward. And it's kind of fascinating because it's like he felt that for example, there wasn't enough stuff at Disneyland. There's lots of stuff at Disneyland that appealed to men, but not a whole lot of stuff that appealed to women. And so, one of the ideas that Walt came up with, they actually reached out to the Crane Plumbing Company.
Okay. They're still around. Okay.
Yes. Well, and so what they built in Tomorrowland was the bathroom of the future.
No.
Yes. So
what was the bathroom of the future?
It was.
It involved
gold.
It was a gold machine.
Gold-plated toilet and bidet. You could, the kids could spin various knobs and make, water fountains flow. It took them quite a while to figure out how to get a handle on what they could put in Tomorrowland, and this was part of that.
All right. The bathroom of tomorrow.
Bathroom of Tomorrow, and again, designed to appeal to the women. Same time he announced that they were they had just sent.
Sorry, I have to tell a side story. So Laurel and I were in Vegas at Aria, the relatively new hotel, and they've got one of these in our room. We have a nice room. They have one of these. They have a regular toilet. Then they have a Japanese toilet. You've seen the one with the buttons and everything.
Yep.
So for like 2 days, the first 2 days we're there, no one uses the Japanese toilet. And then finally, over a bottle of wine, Laurel and I decide that Laurel is going to actually try it to see what happens. So she goes in, she uses it, and there's this long wait, like 5-10 minutes, like longer than you would think it would take to to use a bathroom,
Mhm.
and she comes out, and I was like, well, how is it? And she says, we must never speak of this again. And that was it. That was it. That was the entire thing. But apparently it's got like you said, it's got all these like water fountain like features that clean various parts of your body that with different water pressures and temperatures and sensors and everything. Okay, all right. Anyway,
And it's also worth noting here that another supposedly female appealing thing that was going to be added to Tomorrowland was actually the House of the Future, and
the House of the Future.
So the Monsanto plastic house, and again it's the whole notion of when you hear it's one thing to build it, it's another thing to. That's why they built it that way. It was supposed to appeal to women. That's why we had the tour of the kitchen.
You see the video for it? There's like a 40-minute video on YouTube for it.
Yeah, and but again, it's just kind of sad that even Walt kind of bought into the whole June Cleaver thing. It's just sort of like, yeah, that's what we need. To show the women.
So it was designed. It was because I've seen the video, and it does actually. Now that you mention it's true. Yeah, because it opens with like a mom and a daughter making dinner.
Yep.
And it is focused on women, isn't it? Yeah, I totally get that. How about that? Okay.
And at the same time, they're looking to bring in, rides that they can convince people that they have to come back to Disneyland to ride. So, at this point, Disney had just sent people over to Switzerland to buy the Skyway ride that they're going to bring back to the park.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, pieces of real estate that you would have thought were opening day things. I mean, for example, Tom Sawyer's Island, until '56 was just something you floated around.
Really?
Likewise, the Casey Jr. train, though it ran, just ran through this kind of weed-filled void. Again, same thing with the canal boats of the world, which they had to go out and actually build the storybook canal boat buildings for, just to give the guests something to look at. But that's how much, again, Disneyland really kind of had to evolve because nobody had ever built a Disneyland before.
Right.
And meanwhile, again, Walt now really starts have to looking over his shoulder. Never mind CV. In 1956, CBS, which, let's remember, had a shot at Disneyland, said no.
Mm-hmm.
Gets in bed with the Los Angeles Turf Club, it's the folks who run the Santa Anita Raceway,
mm-hmm.
and they lease the Ocean Park Pier, and that they announced their plans. They're going to build a $10 million nautical-themed theme park called Pacific Ocean Park. And, again, they stress they're going to do just what Disney did. They're going to hire the best, the best amusement park designers. They're going to get the top effects people in Hollywood. And so Walt is like, all right, we got to go to war here. So, he announces, that there's a sign that goes up on Main Street that, opening late in 1956 is International Street. And this was going to be built out behind, between Main Street and Tomorrowland. It was going to be, honestly, the earliest iteration of a lot of the concepts that Walt, the Imagineers eventually did for World Showcase. It was lots of little shops and restaurants that would, you turn one corner and you'd be in London. You come around the next corner and here you are in Paris. Go around the next corner and you're in Italy.
Wow. It's like the prototype for Epcot. Wow.
Yeah.
Right, but that never got built. This is like late '56.
Well, and that's again, this is where it gets kind of interesting because you just get this whiff of Walt starts throwing things out there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, mind you, for Disneyland's first birthday in July 17th, 1956, they do this big info dump just to sort of make the public aware of, how successful Disneyland is and
mm-hmm.
that how far the competition will have to come to compete with Disney. All right. So by this point, 3.6 million visitors have come to the park. And
3.6.
Interesting thing, 41% of those came from out of state.
Wow.
The other thing, a fascinating stat is that for every one child that came through the door, 4 adults came to the park.
It's the ratio it should be, man.
Yeah.
I mean, Disney parks aren't for kids. I know that kids love them, but
Mhm.
a lot of the design details are just you can appreciate best as an adult. Anyway,
I agree. Anyway, the top attractions of the park were
Jungle
Peter Pan Dark Ride in Fantasyland, Jungle Cruise, you're right.
Yeah.
Santa Fe and Disneyland Railroad, but to be honest, it's really more about you can get more people on them, and the Autopia. In fact, what got funny about the Autopia is that because there was such a demand from kids to do, that they wanted to do the Autopia, that for a time there were 3 different Autopias in the park. They were by 57. There was the Tomorrowland Autopia. They had added the Fantasyland version along with the motorboat cruise, and there was even a junior Autopia where with midget cars where they actually made them small enough so you're talking 3 and 4-year-olds could drive these things.
Really?
Yeah. Actually, right over where to give you some idea of where it was located, it's kind of where what is it? The Fantasyland Theater is located now. It fronted right there.
Oh, wow.
So,
Wow. 3 Autopias.
So, but anyway, Walt got, and again, we got very concerned about, the notion that Disneyland was very expensive and wanted to get out in front of that. So they put this stat out where they talked about the average guest expenditure was only $2.37, and that was parking, admissions, rides, amusements, even the souvenirs. And Walt also stressed that yes, we have 33 rides and amusement, but there are 21 free attractions.
Wow.
Just that was the thing. Walt, I think it's important to stress here that back in the day, there was only one guy who called the shots. And again, that's why CV was kicked to the curb. Walt called the shots. This was Walt's personal train set, and what he wanted in the park went. Nothing else was really taken into consideration, and which was why sometimes Walt's decisions were a little strange. I mean, for example, March of '56, one of the shops that opened on Main Street was Jimmy Star's Show Business Souvenirs, and this was really the first Sid Cahuenga store.
I was going to say, yeah, they had one for the longest time at the studios. Huh.
Okay, but here's the thing. The reason Walt cut the deal with Jimmy is that Jimmy had this great collection of old black and white silent movies, and Walt needed those films for the silent movie theater on Main Street.
Really? So it wasn't always Mickey Mouse cartoons?
No.
Oh, really?
You could actually go in there and see Chaplin. You could go in and see Phantom of the Opera.
Really?
Well, again, for Walt, this was about authenticity. In fact, in a particularly bizarre piece of Disney history, you got to understand that Phantom of the Opera was made by Universal, back, I want to say 1919. But if you went to Disneyland, there would be this guy with a top hat and a cape and a rubber Phantom of the Opera mask lurking in the doorway of the cinema. And, you'd just come by and he would come out and jump at you. So,
I've never heard half these stories. This is amazing. Did the guy end up just getting punched every day, and did he quit?
I'm not sure. But again, that was old Disneyland, and and it then became about how do we get people to come out to the park? And how do we, just now we're a going concern, and it's just we have to make sure that people come so that. They do things like the Aunt Jemima pancake race, where women would race through the park with iron skillets, flipping pancakes over ropes that were set 10 feet high over Main Street, or the antique automobile parade. That was the big thing for Easter '56. You went, and suddenly here were all these classic Model Ts and that sort of thing. Again, private collectors had driven to Disneyland so they could parade them through the park.
Yeah. Walt needed stuff.
Well, and that's it exactly. And at the same time, Walt was also in the process of refining what was there. I mean, for example, the stagecoaches and the mule pack ride in Tomorrowland. he shut it down for a couple of months because he felt, it's like, look, we need more. And so this is when they built Rainbow Ridge. And I mean, again, Walt, just, started, spent $400,000 to build the Rainbow Caverns just to give the park, new exciting things so that people would come back.
So where were these caverns? This is the stuff in Tom Sawyer Island?
No, this is actually where Big Thunder Mountain Railroad is today. I mean, this is where
this is where the old mine train thing.
There you go. And at the same time, you just get the sense that, part of the reason that Walt is doing this is because he's keeping an eye on what CV is up to. And CV has just gotten, his first park, non-Disney park going. This is Magic Mountain, which was going to be built in Colorado at the base of the Rockies at Apex Gulch. And the idea was this theme park was going to celebrate the past, present, and future of Colorado. And if you take a look at the map of this thing, I mean, it's so obvious he's lifting the plans are straight from Disneyland. I mean, you have a frontier town that's basically Main Street, USA.
What was the name of it? Sorry.
It's called Magic Mountain. Again, Colorado was supposed to open in 1957. And if you look at the map of this thing, you have your frontier town, which goes to a cavalry fort that's, if you squint, it's Disneyland Castle. I mean, it's positioned in the exact same way. More to the point, instead of a Fantasyland, they have a Storybook Lane. Instead of, a Tomorrowland, they have the Magic of Industry area. And, what's fascinating about this park is that they ran out of money while building it. That CV didn't have the power of the Disney name, so he thought he'd be able to do what he did the last time, just sort of convince all these people to come on board.
Oh, okay. So I found a map of it online. Oh my God, yeah, it's just I'm looking at the artist's conception of the Magic Mountain Park. It's got a main street in the middle. It's got a lagoon where Frontierland. Oh my God, yeah.
No, I mean CV, just
it's almost using the same font to spell Magic Mountain.
There you go. And right down to the train that circles the park. But they ran out of money after they built Main Street. And CV at that point had, in the classic Harold Hill tradition, had cashed his check and moved on. And the interesting thing is that Magic Mountain eventually, these buildings are still standing today. They reimagined what got built as Heritage Square. It's a shopping mall now.
Wow.
Anyway, meantime, again, here's Walt. Once again, kind of, just sort of like, okay, we've got to do new stuff at the park. And even though they had announced International Street, they'd actually built sort of a look through as to where the area was going to be built on Town Square. In fact, there was a sign that said the site of future sites, and you could look through at these tiny little models. By the time 58 rolled around, International Street was gone, and what was going to be built in its place was Liberty Street. And this is the early precursor of Liberty Square for Walt Disney World. In fact, a lot of the ideas for this, for example, the Hall of Presidents, really can be dated back to, this Liberty Street, though, this was, years and years and years before, they got serious about our animatronics. So it was going to be
what was the idea?
Waxworks. Well, just the idea is that it was going to be telling. In fact, again, to just give you some idea of how Walt's mind works, they were working on a 2-episode version of Johnny Tremain for the Disneyland television series. And Walt was looking at the production art, was looking at the models for the sets. And first thing he did is like, wow, this is too good to waste on the Disneyland TV show. Let's do this as a theatrical release.
Really?
And secondly, let's take these ideas and bring them to Disneyland. So, I mean, again, that's what's fascinating about Walt is that he was all about this kind of, he was a magpie. He would see something at the studio that you'd think, was going to be a movie or a TV show, and suddenly it's mutated into something that's going into the parks. But, it's going to be a lot of classic crafts things. I mean, you're going to be able to see glass blowing, and again, you remember that Johnny Tremain in the story is an apprentice of Paul Revere. So you're going to be able to see a tinsmith shop and a silversmith. And again, with a recreation of the Liberty Tree from Boston, where they'd hang the lanterns,
Right.
Independence Hall, even the Boston shipyards. I mean, there's a.
So this was going to be huge. Where were they were doing this as models, or they were doing these as full size things?
They were going to be doing it as a full size thing. It was going to be again located behind Main Street USA in Tomorrowland. In fact, again, if you folks Google Liberty Street, there's lots of artwork out there. There's I mean, they were serious. It was definitely going forward. But in the end, it was one of the things where it held Walt's attention for a while. Then I think in a way the fact that the Johnny Tremain film came out and wasn't as popular as Walt had planned, originally Liberty Street was supposed to open in '59, and by then, Walt had decided, we need more thrill rides and we need more arts and crafts, and that was when the monorail, the Matterhorn, and the submarine voyage were built. But again, just what's fascinating about this period is, again, because this is you got to remember that Disneyland is basically Walt's giant train set. So he's always putting things in, to make his train set more fun. So, for example, in '57, the Jungle Cruise gets an upgrade. There's a rainforest put in. You get 2 gorillas to menace people on the side of the river. You get the native, the native war party and the dancing, the natives. But this is also the first appearance of Trader Sam. That's finally there's a figure at the end of the ride, but to give you some idea, that was the height of Disney animatronics at that point. You had a figure that could raise shrunken heads and put them down.
That was that's when Trader Sam first showed up, 1958.
1957.
57.
So,
okay. Wow.
Same time, you've got April of '57, the Sleeping Beauty Castle walkthrough finally opens. I mean, up until this point, Sleeping Beauty Castle has just been this empty shell.
And could you walk through it or no?
Well, it depended on whether the janitor left the door open or not. Every so often, somebody would look up and there were these people walking around on the parapets. It's like, damn it, somebody forgot to lock the door.
You could get up all the way into the parapets.
Yeah.
Those were the days, man. Those were the days.
So, but even then, and this is where this is kind of a dark side of the Disney story. I mean, Disneyland really began to become most of Walt's focus. I mean, yes, he was paying attention to what they were doing on television. He was paying attention to, but not as much. In fact, for example, one of the reasons that Sleeping Beauty Castle walkthrough opened in '57 was the movie was supposed to come out in '57.
Right.
And and Walt it wasn't ready, and because a lot of it wasn't reason it wasn't ready was Walt wasn't really paying attention. The animators were really competing. It used to be you'd see Walt. We'd work on a movie every week, and by this point in the company's history, you're lucky if you get to see Walt every month.
Really? Wow.
And so the film fell very much behind schedule and went very much over budget. And in fact, when we get to '59, pretty much weeks after it opened and was declared a box office bust. In fact, I mean, just 2 or 3 weeks after Sleeping Beauty opened in theaters, The Shaggy Dog opened, and it had been produced for about a sixth of what it had cost to produce, the Sleeping Beauty, and it I think it made triple the box office.
Wow.
And so Disney actually had this huge layoff in animation that they gutted feature animation for a while. It really looked like Disney was going to get out of that business and just concentrate on the parks. Anyway, so but again, this is Walt. That Walt does what Walt loves. So it's like they need to increase capacity of the parks. Walt loves trains, so he decides they're going to get a third railroad train for the park. And so he goes out and he sends an agent out around the country to find a steam train, and is actually able to pick up this old disused steam train for $1,200.
Wow.
And now, mind you, he has to spend $57,000 to retool the thing and get it ready to put into the park. But I mean, just the whole notion of, all right, here's $1,200, give you your train. And meanwhile, July of the same year, the Santa Monica Pier closes to begin its redo as Pacific Ocean Park. And Disneyland again is trying to make sure that it's doing everything that guests want it to do. So, first time ever on July 31st, 57, they held their first New Year's Eve party. 7,500 people turned out. And 3 weeks later,
that's like what's in the central hub.
yeah. But at the same time, recognizing that now that they've been running for over 2 years at this point, and that guests come to the park and sometimes bring their pets, so they open the Kennelration Pet Motel, to put it out right side the main gate.
Pets.
And then because you put your third train on the line and you got to give guests something to look at, March of '58, you open the Grand Canyon Diorama. And they spent over $350,000 building this thing. And
the Grand Canyon. So I've been on the train. I remember the Grand Canyon Diorama.
Yeah, with some of the worst, that's taxidermy that anybody's ever seen on the planet. I mean, I'm always amazed that you get on this thing and it's like, I'm pretty sure turkeys don't look like that.
Yes.
Or at least they aren't covered with dust.
That antelope over there looks like he's more surprised than I am that I'm here.
And again, Walt, because now he has the cash flow, he has the money, is putting things in that, again, he thinks makes the park look good, makes the park look busy, gives guests more options. So June of '58, the Columbia debuts. And again, Walt spent, $300,000, but he got his river that now looks busy because it's not just the Mark Twain, but it's the Columbia and, the Tom Sawyer's rafts and the war canoes and the Mike Fink boats.
It's funny because we always think about the kinetic movement that you see as you walk through the parks, and to us, when you walk into Disneyland now, it's been there for 60 years. A lot of the stuff that you've seen has been tested to be crowd friendly and work in a theme park environment for 50 or 60 years. But it's funny to hear that back in the day, there was no master plan. Nobody's consulting textbooks called The Psychology of Crowds or whatever to tell you that there's that movement makes things interesting. They figure this out stuff, and it sounds like it's through some combination of intuition, Walt wanted something to move, and trial and error.
Oh, very much so, very much so. But at the same time, don't forget ego. I mean, for example, July 28th, 1958. Pacific Ocean Park finally opens. And what's one of their central attractions? The Deepest Deep, which is a simulated on dry land voyage of a submarine. And, a
simulated submarine voyage.
There you go.
And
the interesting thing is that on opening day, for the first 6 days that Pacific Ocean Park is open, it does better business than Disneyland. And, of course, the people who are running Pacific Ocean Park, CVS, and oddly enough, one of the big investors in this thing was Lawrence Welk. So, he hypes that. And again, this kind of sticks in Walt's craw. So it's just sort of, all right, so they're going to do a simulated on land submarine voyage. We're going to do a real submarine voyage. So, he sends Roger Broggie and Joe Fowler over to Germany, and they're checking out the Alweg company for the monorail. But again, think about it. We've talked about how long has it taken to build Avatar Land?
Oh, it'll be 7 years, I think, by the time it opens, right?
Okay, so picture this. Pacific Ocean Park opens July 20th, 1959. All right, we jump ahead a year, or actually less than a year, July 14th, 1959.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And Walt in that time has not only built the monorail and the submarines, he's also built the Matterhorn, which is this 100th scale, version of the Matterhorn, the famous mountain.
Yeah, the cells.
Yeah, and put it, again, we're talking 1,275 steel girders, every one of them cut to a different length. The total cost of the build of this is 1.5 million. And again, backs this up with a live television, or excuse me, they learned the hard way. They weren't going to go live because of, if you've seen the original Disneyland opening day, things went a little south a couple times. So this time was pre-recorded. But again, 90-minute long television special that coincidentally was timed to go on the air just ahead of the opening of C.V. Wood's next park, which was Pleasure Island, just outside of Boston, which again, once again ripped off, Disneyland in a big way. I mean, again, instead of coming through Main Street USA, you are now in sort of a knockoff Cape Cod, New England village that, you walk to the end of the street, and instead of the Jungle Cruise, you now sail off in search of Moby Dick. I mean, it's all of this stuff that, but again, it's all about Walt establishing that, look, I have competition, but I am the king of themed entertainment. And he would take any idea and anything that he saw and would put it in the park. I mean, take, for example, August 1st, 1958, they have a Disney night at the Hollywood Bowl. It's this evening of Disney music, and, and he packs it with celebrities. I mean, for example, when they perform the Ballad of Davy Crockett, who comes out on stage in full Crockett regalia, but Fess Parker, and the evening's entertainment ends with they've set a wire up from the top of the Hollywood Bowl, and Tiny Klein, and her real name's Helen Klein, this aerialist dressed as Tinkerbell, jumps off of the thing and slides over the crowd. And
that's the origin of the...
That's the origin. Walt was sitting in the audience that night and was like, oh, that is cool.
They feel about doing this nightly in the parks.
And that's 3 years later. That became, the beginning of the fireworks. But again, this is Walt. This is how Walt does things. That, this is his personal park, and he makes the decisions. And in fact, it was actually, this brings us to kind of what happens next. But Walt really began to chafe at the notion that ABC was definitely starting to be a pain in his butt. I mean,
so I was going to ask you about this. So the park's been open. It's late '58, early '59. Park's been open 3.5 years. ABC's got to be looking at this, and they own what, a third? They're getting a third of the gate.
Yep.
It's all of the concession revenue,
particularly the food, and that coupled with the fact that on the television side of things, that, for example, those two other television series that Walt had created for ABC, the Mickey Mouse Club, which was run in the afternoon as a strip, and Zorro. Though both of these shows are popular, ABC decides to cancel the Mickey Mouse Club in its fourth season, and kind of loses enthusiasm for Zorro. And Walt, it's one of these things. We produce these things that they're top quality shows. You should put them out there. He actually turns around and sues ABC.
Really, his partner.
Yeah, and eventually they come to terms. He gets damages in the settlement, but part of the deal is that ABC forbids him to sell Zorro or the Mickey Mouse Club to any other networks at that point.
So it's dead at that point.
And this is the thing. It's like, here's this company that's taking it's a third of Disneyland. Is getting all of his food revenue, and
they're telling him what to do on the TV side.
And it's one of these things where it's like, this is Walt. Walt doesn't like being told what to do, particularly by, people who are, again, ABC is based out of New York at this point.
Right.
And it's just all this money going east. It's just sort of like really starts to get at him.
Yeah.
So, and meanwhile, he's systematically taking control of places within the park that had previously been, booked by other sponsors. I mean, for example, just the gentleman we talked about, Jimmy Starr, the Show Business Souvenirs. His shop closes September '59. Walt takes that open and makes it into a Disney-owned gift shop. Likewise over in Tomorrowland, the World Beneath Us exhibit, which was what was that? Was sponsored by Richfield Oil. He takes it over, and again, that becomes a Disney-owned thing. He's slowly starting to take control of his park. And as they're looking at ABC, he turns to Roy and says, we need to do something about ABC, which is the story we'll get to in the next installment.
Oh, fantastic. Wow. It's a great show, Jim. I mean, with so much stuff that I've never heard before and any of this stuff. Wow, and a cliffhanger, too. I love it.
Well, we aims to please. So.
Great job. Yeah, really, really good episode. Cool. All right, you've been listening to the Unofficial Guide Disney Dish podcast with Jim Hill. Please go on to iTunes and rate us and let us know what you'd like to hear next. This was our 2nd February episode. Our next one will be on March 1st. For Jim, this is Len. We will see you on the next show.
Take care, guys.